Story 1. By the time 2014 rolled around, my hiking partner Jonah and I had already tackled a good chunk of the American wilderness. We'd carved our way through the evergreens of British Columbia, baked under the brutal heat of Utah's salt flats, and clambered over the jagged summits of the Rockies like men on a mission. But there was one place still burning a hole in our plans. The Bitterroot Wild Reserve in central Montana. Locals just called it the Root. It wasn't just a hike this time. It was supposed to be a deep woods escape. No cell service, no noise, just us, some backpacks, and whatever the wild decided to throw our way. We packed our gear, left from our homes in northern Nevada, and drove 2 days through winding highways and sleepy towns until the mountains began to swell and stretch across the horizon. By the time we pulled into the gravel parking area beside Clearwater Fork, the Root's sheer size had settled in. Over 2 million acres, unmarked in places, and utterly wild. We parked by a cracked wooden sign that warned about wildfires, wolves, and isolation. We slung our packs, 30 pounds of everything we needed: food, water purifiers, shelter, and emergency supplies. It was our entire world strapped to our backs. Day 1 was peaceful, almost deceivingly so. We followed a trail that threaded through pine groves and sun-dappled ferns. No real chatter between us, just the crunch of boots and the occasional rustle of wind. We covered around 8 miles before settling near a stream that gurgled just enough to lull you to sleep. Day 2 felt like more of the same, only deeper. The trail twisted up rocky ridges and down into mossy gullies. The deeper we went, the more the undergrowth reached for us, tangling our legs and swallowing the path whole in places. We ate granola and nuts, swapped the map between us, and nodded at our compass like it was a guiding spirit. That night we set camp on a flattish clearing under the arms of some tall birches, boiled up dehydrated chili, and passed out like we'd been drugged. Nearly 20 miles in, and it felt like we were just warming up. By day 3, something had shifted. Not in the woods, but in us. There was a restlessness brewing. Maybe it was ego or boredom, but Jonah turned to me mid-step and said, "Let's go off trail. The real stuff's not on the path." And I didn't even blink. I just nodded. As soon as we veered into the trees, the entire forest seemed to grow teeth. The trunks were wider here, roots thick as arms snaking out of the ground, and moss lay so heavy it hushed our footsteps. Light barely reached the floor. The canopy sealed overhead, and everything below was shadow and green silence. We moved slower, careful not to twist an ankle in the unseen holes, climbing over collapsed trees, and ducking beneath others. But the trade-off was worth it. This place felt untouched, like it had been waiting centuries for someone to walk through it again. Then Jonah stopped. He cocked his head like a dog sniffing something unfamiliar. "You hear that?" he whispered. "You did." First, I didn't, but then, yeah, I caught it too. A low, strange hum. Not wind, not water. It sounded artificial, mechanical, and that was enough to keep us moving toward it. The deeper we went, the louder it got. Then, pushing through a thick curtain of saplings, we found it. A concrete structure tucked into the rise of a hill, barely visible beneath ivy and soil. It looked like a Cold War relic. Rusted steel door hanging half off its frame, graffiti, no, not graffiti, but weird carved symbols covered every inch of its face. Swirls, jagged lines, things that didn't spell anything but still didn't feel random. And the hum? It was music, metal by the sound of it. Distorted guitars, screaming vocals like someone had set a speaker to bleed into the trees. We froze about 10 feet from the door. It wasn't the music that scared us. It was the people who might be inside. Jonah looked at me, eyes wide. Could have been a bunch of bored survivalists having a mosh pit in the woods. Or it could have been something else entirely. The kind of off the grid you don't come back from. I gave a small nod back the way we came. He didn't argue. We turned to leave. We'd barely made it a few hundred yards when they appeared. 2 men stepped out from the trees like they'd been there the whole time, camouflage from neck to boot, faces covered with dark balaclavas, rifles slung across their chests, something like AKs, gripped tight but not yet raised. Jonah and I stopped like we'd hit a wall. They didn't say a word at first, just watched us, silent but tense. Then one of them raised his weapon. Down. Hands up, he said, flat and without emotion. I looked at Jonah. I could see him thinking. Same as me. Our handguns were buried in our packs. We were sitting ducks, outnumbered, outgunned, and miles from help. I started lifting my hands. Slow, just trying to buy time. Jonah, though, he dropped his pack and ran. Just like that. Fight or flight. And, for him, it was flight. The sound of his gear hitting the ground snapped me out of it. I ditched my pack and bolted after him. Gunfire split the air behind us. A tree exploded near my shoulder, spraying bark like shrapnel. "Don't shoot! We need them alive!" someone shouted from behind. But the bullets didn't stop. They just aimed lower, kicking up dirt at our heels, trying to slow us down, not kill us, which somehow made it worse. We ran like hell. I don't know how far, maybe a mile, maybe 2. Eventually, we stopped, doubled over, lungs on fire. No more voices, no more shots, just wind whispering through the trees. We'd lost them, but we'd also lost everything. Our packs, food, water filters, maps, gone, taken. And in the middle of nowhere, that's not just inconvenient, that's life-threatening. We moved anyway. We had to. That night we curled under a deadfall with just our jackets, the temperature plummeting while hunger gnawed at our bellies. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking I'd see balaclavas appear through the branches. But no one came. At first light we found some wild berries. Not much, but enough to stain our fingers and take the edge off the hunger. We moved south, sun as our compass. My head throbbed, feet blistered, and all we could do was walk. Miles passed in silence, just the sound of our boots grinding into the forest floor. That night we found a rock outcropping and crouched under it. No fire, too risky, and no food. To cook anyway. I dozed in fits. Every snap of twig made me jump. Day 3 was hell. My legs were numb, my mouth dry. Jonah looked like death, pale and gaunt. Neither of us spoke anymore, just one foot after the other. Then, miracle of miracles, a road. Just a dirt track overgrown and barely used, but it led us to a ranger's cabin. We stumbled in looking like ghosts. The ranger, gray-bearded, flannel shirt, didn't ask questions at first, just poured us coffee. Then we talked. About the bunker, the music, the armed men, everything. He called the sheriff. Rangers went out to investigate. And when they returned, nothing. No men, no gear, just a concrete shell carved with symbols. Empty as the silence that followed. The police weren't shocked. One of them shrugged and said, "You probably crossed a militia camp. They pop up in places like this. Not fond of being found." He told us we were lucky. Said not to go back. That was the end of it. No arrests, no investigation. Just a warning and a quiet dismissal. On the drive home, Jonah stared out the window the entire time. I gripped the steering wheel like it was keeping me tethered to reality. The woods, once our refuge, suddenly felt like something else entirely. Watching. Waiting. We never hiked the route again. And to this day, I wonder, were those men still out there, rifles in hand, waiting for the next pair of fools to wander too deep? Story 2. A while back, feels like another life now, my friend Marcus and I took a trip out to the Windfall Trail, along the north coast. It's one of those spots most people haven't heard of, wedged between steep cliffs and long stretches of untouched shoreline. We started at sunrise, laughing about co-workers, griping about bills, and just appreciating the kind of quiet that city life doesn't allow. By midday, my legs were burning like they'd been filled with hot lead, and I could see Marcus dragging, too. So we decided to take a break and check our bearings. We found a decent clearing just off the trail, a patch of open earth with a wide, flat boulder right in the middle like it had been placed there by design. Looked like a perfect seat. I dropped my pack, popped open my water bottle, and drank, deep. Marcus knelt beside me, unfolding our map and mumbling to himself while tracing the trail lines with his finger. Then, it happened. Everything shifted. Just for a second. A massive shadow rolled over us like someone had shut off the sun. It wasn't the flicker of a cloud or the passing of a bird overhead. It was big, enormous, like the sky itself had dropped, an eyelid, and blinked. I froze mid-sip, water slipping down my chin, staring upward. But the sky? Clear. Not a single wisp of cloud. Just blue, endless and unbroken. Marcus noticed it too. He stopped cold, neck craning up just as the light returned. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. He sounded unsettled, way more than I expected. I scanned the sky, the treetops, the ridge lines, anything that could explain what we just saw. But there was nothing. No planes, no birds. And this was before drones were everywhere, so that wasn't it either. Whatever cast that shadow, it moved fast and smooth. Too fast, too smooth. And the silence that followed was somehow louder than anything I'd ever heard. Then the wind hit. It whipped through the clearing like a slap, sharp and sudden, cold enough to sting. Not the kind of breeze you expect on a calm afternoon. It kicked up loose leaves, shook the trees, and seemed to chase after whatever had passed overhead. I felt it deep, like my skin recognized something my mind couldn't. Marcus stood up quickly, the map forgotten at his feet, and turned a full circle. "You saw that, right?" he asked. Not accusing, just desperate for confirmation. All I could do was nod, and for a while we just stood there, waiting. No birds, no bugs, not even the hum of distant waves. Just the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the forest was holding its breath. I kept expecting something to emerge from the trees, or drop from the sky, but nothing did. Eventually I said, "We should go." Marcus didn't need convincing. He grabbed the map, stuffed it into his pack, and we left. Neither of us said it aloud, but we weren't finishing the hike. We were leaving, and we didn't even bother retracing the trail. We cut straight back through brush, ducking under branches, thorns grabbing at our sleeves. My eyes stayed fixed on the sky, and I knew Marcus was doing the same. Every rustle made me jump. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. It took maybe an hour to reach the trailhead again, though it felt like twice that. My shirt was soaked through, and I was breathing like I'd just run a marathon. But the moment we saw Marcus's old Jeep still sitting in the dirt lot, relief crashed over me like a wave. We tossed our packs in the back and climbed inside, then just sat there for a minute, windows rolled down, staring out at the trees like we expected them to whisper something back. After a while, Marcus broke the silence. "It was probably just a hawk or something," he said. "Flying low, you know how shadows get stretched out weird." He didn't sound like he believed it. He sounded like he wanted to believe it. "Yeah," I said, though I didn't buy it either. "Could have been the light playing tricks." "And that wind?" he added. "Just a weird gust. Coincidence." I nodded again, the kind of nod you give when the alternative is too strange to say out loud. He started the engine, and we drove away with static from the radio filling the silence between us, some country song playing low. We didn't talk much on the drive back, and when he dropped me off, he didn't stick around like usual. No post-hike beer, no recap of the trail, just a wave and a quick later. And that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying it all. The shadow, the wind, that sudden silence like the world had hit pause. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. It felt wrong, like something snuck into our world and left just as quickly. Weeks passed. Life filled the space. Work, grocery lists, errands. I went hiking again, on other trails, and nothing strange happened, but it was never quite the same. And here's the thing, I started watching the sky differently. I'd find myself staring up on clear days, scanning for something I couldn't name. That shadow never left my mind. It lives there now, tucked into a corner like a secret. I looked into it once. Late at night, unable to shake the memory, I opened my laptop and searched things like massive shadow overhead and weird sky phenomena. The results were a mess. Grainy photos, UFO theories, ancient bird legends, none of it clicked. None of it fit. It wasn't a UFO. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't an eagle the size of a glider. It was something that didn't belong. Not here. Not on that day. Marcus and I still hang out, grab beers, watch games, but we haven't hiked together since. Not once. We never said we wouldn't. We just didn't. I think we both know why. That thing in the sky, whatever it was, changed something. Made the woods feel different. Less safe. Less known. And sometimes late at night I wonder if it's still out there, drifting over tree lines, casting shadows on strangers. Watching. And I wonder if we were just unlucky, or if we were supposed to see it. Story 3. Back in the summer of 1983, I was working as part of a wilderness search and response unit out of northern Cascadia. It was a job that mostly meant early mornings, muddy boots, and long stretches of slow, quiet work. Nothing glamorous, but I loved it. You spend enough time in the woods, and you begin to think like them. Cautious, patient, and always listening. One Tuesday night, just as I was preparing to head home, the call came in. A local man named Grant Winslow had gone missing. An experienced solo hiker, Grant had spent years exploring the Timberfall Forest region of the Alder Ridge Preserve. His wife reported him overdue. He was supposed to be back by Monday night, and by Tuesday evening she was worried enough to contact us. According to her, his last known location was a trailhead near the Clearwater River, and his destination was a ridge about 8 miles north, routine on paper. Grant wasn't new to the outdoors, and we had a good start point. If you'd asked me, I would have bet we'd find him before nightfall. I was wrong. By dawn Wednesday, we had mobilized a full effort. Local officers, forest rangers, and about 30 volunteers met at the trailhead. Radios, maps, medical kits. We had everything laid out. My team was assigned the western sector, hugging the river's edge while other groups covered the eastern grid. We stepped off at 5:47 a.m. The first few hours passed slow and quiet. No movement, no signs. Just us scanning the forest floor for broken branches or boot prints, calling Grant's name into the thick silence every so often. Then, around midday, one of my teammates, a guy named Eric, called in on the radio. He'd found something. I veered off and made my way half a mile east, where the rest of the group had gathered, all staring up into a tree like they were looking for God. About 30 feet above us, tangled in the branches of a thin cedar, was a torn backpack. The straps fluttered in the breeze like dead leaves, and the entire pack looked like it had been ripped apart and then hurled into the branches. It matched the description his wife gave us. Forest green with a hand-sewn red triangle on the side. Another teammate, Lena, volunteered to climb up and retrieve it. She rigged a harness and scaled the trunk carefully. The tree was too thin to bear much weight, but the bag was somehow wedged into the limbs. Not dropped. Thrown. When she brought it down, we saw the damage. Deep, linear gashes had shredded through the fabric. Not bite marks, not scratches. These were slashes, clean and angry. Inside, his water bottle had cracked open, soaking a mashed sandwich and a spiral-bound notepad. There was no blood, not yet. 2 hours later, our radios crackled again. This time, a boot had turned up in a clearing maybe a mile north of us. We hiked over, expecting more gear or maybe a trail leading away. It was just a single hiking boot. Upright. Laces tied like Grant had stepped right out of it. Still no blood, no tracks, just the boot. We marked the location and kept moving. Then, maybe an hour later, another team. One operating far east of us, nearly 2 miles away, called in with a sick edge to their voices. They'd found the second boot. This one wasn't empty. Grant's foot was still inside, cleanly severed above the ankle, the skin torn, jagged like it had been twisted until it snapped. Blood clung to the inside of the boot, sticky and dark, and flies were already circling. It hadn't been there long. I felt ice settle into my stomach. I've seen a lot in the backcountry. Falls, animal attacks, even gunshot wounds. But this was something else. We expanded the search immediately, breaking our grid into tighter pieces and moving slower, more deliberately. Then we started to find the blood. It began with a smear on a birch trunk, just at shoulder height, then droplets on pine needles, a streak across a boulder. At first, it seemed random, unpredictable, but soon it became clear. The blood wasn't forming a trail. It was everywhere. Tiny spatters on branches 10 feet above our heads. Coin-sized dots fanned out across entire tree trunks. Thin streaks on moss-covered logs. It was like someone had soaked a sponge and whipped it around wildly, except it wasn't random. It felt placed. We marked every spot with flagging tape, and I watched the map turn into something like a web. Red X's scattered across the trees like someone had started painting the forest. That night, with the fog rolling in and no sign of Grant's body, we set up a temporary camp near the ridge. No one really slept. I lay awake, listening to nothing. The total absence of wind, of birds, of rustling. Just this eerie, dead quiet that felt wrong. Around midnight, I heard a branch snap in the dark. Not just a twig. Something solid. I bolted upright and swept my flashlight in the direction of the sound. The beam cut through trees but revealed nothing. Not even a raccoon. But that silence didn't break. That unnatural quiet that makes the hair on your neck stand up. Eventually, I was relieved of watch and tried to sleep, but it was restless and filled with a gnawing sense that we were not alone. The next morning, we picked up the blood trail again. It hadn't dried. In some spots, it looked fresh. I found a smear on a pine trunk a full 10 feet off the ground. No branches below it to climb, no way anyone could have reached it without a ladder. Another teammate found a ring of droplets on a flat rock, like someone had stood there spinning in place. And more blood, always just far enough away to keep us moving but never toward anything conclusive. By early afternoon, we'd hit the edge of our search area. No body, no clothing, no more signs of Grant. Just that pack, those boots, and a forest, stained red in a pattern no one could explain. We called it around 3 p.m. on the third day. Too much blood lost. No one could survive it. He was gone. We reported it all, handed it over to the local authorities who filed the paperwork and chalked it up to probable animal predation. Some kind of bear, they said. Official language. Clean, contained, but I've seen bear attacks. They leave messes, claw marks, chunks of flesh, not perfectly severed feet and backpacks flung into trees. Not blood sprayed so high it looked like someone painted the canopy. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. Grant Winslow was declared deceased, body unrecovered. His family mourned, and the news cycle moved on. Most of the team went their separate ways. Eric took a job in the city. Lena left the service entirely. I stayed on for a few more years, but I never looked at the woods the same after that. I still have the map from that operation, the one with all those red marks. It's tucked away in a drawer. Sometimes late at night, I'll pull it out and just stare. Every X is a moment, something strange, something wrong, and I know what the report says. I know what people believe, but I also know the truth. We didn't find Grant because he wasn't meant to be found, and whatever took him wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something still out there. Watching. Story 4. Back in the early 90s, I worked as a forest land surveyor up in northern Yukon, charting the stretches of Pinecrest National Preserve, a remote, sprawling wilderness in western Canada. On paper, the job sounded simple. Map the land, mark tree lines, note environmental changes. But once your boots hit the ground, that simplicity vanished. Out there, nothing was ever straightforward. Pinecrest covered over 4,000 square kilometers. Endless groves of spruce, jagged mountain ridges, and boggy basins that could suck down an ATV like it was nothing. I'd been on that job for years and learned to thrive on the solitude. There's a certain peace in being miles away from another human, with nothing but the crunch of leaves underfoot and the wind in the canopy above. In late August of 1993, I was deeper into the backcountry than I'd ever been. 3 days on foot, from the nearest ranger outpost, with my pack loaded down with gear, notes, and enough food to last me a week. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became, until it felt like I was walking through an empty cathedral. That particular morning started off like any other. I broke camp at sunrise, followed the curve of an old glacial runoff that I'd been tracking for days, and made my way north through a particularly dense stand of spruce. It was around mid-morning when I noticed something odd. The trees ahead of me weren't standing quite right. They leaned outward, almost away from something. Not like they'd grown that way, but like something had forced them back. I squinted through the trunks and saw a clearing beyond. A perfect, unnatural circle burned into the woods like a scar. I stepped closer. The ground crunched beneath my boots, brittle and pale. The soil wasn't charred, but it had lost all color, faded to a ghostly gray-white like bone. The trees inside the clearing were stripped bare, their bark flaking like dry skin, and their limbs looked like fingers stretched in warning. Everything within that circle looked drained. Not burnt, not frozen, just void of life. At the center was a shallow crater, barely 3 feet wide and maybe 2 feet deep, not massive, but jarringly out of place. It looked like something had hit the ground hard, scooping out a chunk of earth, but there were no rocks, no debris, no sign of whatever caused it. The moment I stepped to its edge, I felt it. The stillness. Not the peaceful kind you find in a quiet glade. This was dead air. Not a bird, not a bug, just a creeping, electric silence. My skin prickled, and I felt eyes on me. Not imagined, not paranoid. It felt real, like something old and angry was watching. I reached into my pack and fumbled out my camera, an old analog thing that had never failed me before. My hands were shaking as I snapped photos. Wide shots of the clearing, close-ups of the crater, trees, soil, anything that could explain what I was looking at. Once I'd taken enough pictures, I backed away slowly, still looking over my shoulder. My head was starting to pound, not the usual headache from dehydration, but something dull and pressing, like my skull was too small for my brain. I figured I'd overexerted myself and took a long drink from my canteen, then started the long walk back. The plan had been to stay another night, but something in my gut told me to keep moving. I wanted walls, a roof, something man-made between me and whatever I'd just stepped into. The first few hours weren't bad, just a slow, steady march through increasingly familiar terrain. But as the sun dropped lower, my stomach started to knot. Every step felt harder than the last. My shirt was soaked through with sweat, and I could feel my balance wavering. By the time I reached the last hill before the outpost, I had to stop. I leaned against a tree, panting. My vision swam. Then came the nausea. Without warning, I doubled over and vomited. It hit me fast, violent and sudden. I wiped my mouth and staggered the rest of the way to the ranger station, which came into view like a lighthouse through fog. Pete, the ranger on duty, saw me stumble in and didn't hesitate. He dropped his paperwork and radioed for a medical evac before I even said a word. I must have looked like death, sweaty, ghost pale, and barely able to stand. My legs gave out before I could explain. Pete caught me, and everything went black. Next thing I knew, I was lying in the back of an ambulance, oxygen mask strapped to my face, IV in my arm. My skin felt clammy. My lips were cracked. The paramedics asked questions. What I ate, where I'd been, if I'd been bitten by anything. I tried to tell them about the crater, the trees, the clearing, but the words didn't come out right. Then I was out again. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped softly nearby. My head throbbed. The doctor who checked on me said I was lucky. Some kind of virus, he guessed. Something aggressive that I'd probably picked up from an insect bite or contaminated water. They pumped me full of fluids and antivirals, and within a couple days, I was stable enough to go home. But I couldn't shake it. The whole time I kept thinking back to that clearing, that patch of forest bleached like bone, the stillness, the way the air refused to move. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I'd taken photos. I had proof. When I got back to headquarters, I turned over my camera. My boss at the time, a gruff guy named Harlan, took it without much fuss. I gave him the rundown, trying to stick to facts, not feelings. He nodded and said they'd develop the film that day. I sat in the break room, sipping stale coffee and waiting like a man on trial. When the tech came back with the photos, his face was unreadable. He laid them on the table without a word. Every shot of that clearing, blurred, not overexposed, not blank, just a foggy mess of static, like someone had wiped the film mid-development. The earlier photos from the trip were fine, crisp, clear, but the ones I needed? Useless. Harlan just looked at me, gave a quiet grunt, and said I should take a few days to rest. No one accused me of lying, but the glances started. Conversations went quiet when I walked in. I was the guy who claimed he saw a ghost crater. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was radiation. Maybe some sort of chemical exposure. But that didn't make sense. The doctors would have found it. They ran every test they could. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up, but I never forgot. In the years that followed, I warned new surveyors to steer clear of strange clearings or places that felt wrong. Most of them laughed it off, thinking I was just an old hand messing with the rookies. But I meant it. Some things in the woods aren't just trees and dirt. I retired in 2004, moved south to a quiet place outside Whitehorse, and tried to leave the past where it belonged. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that spot, that gray, colorless scar in the middle of the forest. I keep the blurred photos in an envelope in my desk. Every now and then, I take them out, look at the white noise printed on glossy paper, and remember how it felt standing there, staring into a crater filled with nothing. People always want a reason, a clean explanation. I don't have one, but I do know this: if I ever stumble across something like that again, I won't go near it. I'll turn around and walk the other way. Story. Feve. A couple of years ago, I went hiking on my own, a rare thing for me. I'm not usually the solo type when it comes to the outdoors, but that day, I felt like the walls of my apartment were pressing in. I needed space, air, trees, so I tossed a bottle of water and a snack into my backpack, grabbed my keys, and hit the road. There was this trail I'd heard about, Whispering Pines Loop, tucked about an hour outside the city, hidden behind a curtain of old-growth forest and barely used anymore. The drive was peaceful. One of those winding, tree-lined routes where your thoughts drift and the road hums beneath your tires like a lullaby. I pulled into a small gravel lot at the trailhead, locked up the car, and started walking. That's the last thing I remember clearly. Next thing I knew, I was back behind the wheel driving home. My hands were on the steering wheel, the sun was dipping low, and the sky was all orange and gold like it was late evening. But the middle part, the entire hike, was gone. A complete blank. It felt like someone had taken a pair of scissors to my memory and sliced out a chunk, then taped the rest back together without telling me. That night, I sat on my couch, beer in hand, staring at nothing while my brain tried to rewind and replay something that wasn't there. I could remember stepping out of the car. I could remember the faded wooden sign at the trail entrance, half covered in moss. I could even picture the first few steps I took into the woods, that quiet you only get when the wind has completely stilled. But after that, nothing. Just darkness. Silence, like someone had hit skip on my own life. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My head felt heavy, like my thoughts were trapped behind a wall of fog. I kept glancing at my hiking boots by the door. They were caked in mud, twigs jammed into the laces, little flecks of pine needles stuck in the stitching. Clearly, I'd been out there. I just didn't remember any of it. Concerned, I booked an appointment with my doctor. He ran the usual checks: pupil response, reflexes, short-term recall. He asked if I'd hit my head, if I'd been drinking, if I was sleeping enough. I answered honestly, and he frowned thoughtfully before saying, "You seem fine, physically at least." He told me to keep an eye on it, to come back if it happened again. I nodded, but deep down, I already knew something had gone wrong. That evening, I tried distracting myself with TV, but my mind kept looping back to that trail. I thought maybe I'd just zoned out, like when you're driving a familiar route and realize you don't remember the last 5 turns. But this wasn't 5 minutes. This was hours. Gone. Eventually, I caved and grabbed my phone. I looked up Whispering Pines Loop. Not a lot of information. A few trail reviews, most of them from years ago. Some talked about rough terrain, poor signage, a deer or two. But one post caught my attention. It was buried deep in a hiking forum. The guy wrote about feeling uneasy the whole time he was on the trail. Said the trees in one stretch looked wrong. Twisted, unnaturally thin, like they were sick or wilting despite the season. He didn't mention any lost time, but his description of that place, it hit something in me. I closed the tab, locked my phone, and sat in the dark, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, or if someone else had experienced it too, just in a different way. Weeks passed. Life pulled me back into its current. Work deadlines, grocery runs, bills. I never told anyone what happened. What would I even say? Hey, I went for a walk and lost 4 hours of my life. They'd think I'd passed out or taken something, but the unease never really left. Some nights I'd catch myself staring out the window, thinking about that shadow in my memory where the forest used to be. Every now and then, I'd feel a flicker of that same fog creeping into my thoughts, and panic would bite at the edges. But so far, it hasn't come back. Not like that. I haven't returned to Whispering Pines, and I haven't hiked solo since. Don't know what happened to me out there. Maybe I passed out. Maybe I had a medical episode. Maybe there's some completely rational explanation. That's the hope, right? But it doesn't feel rational. It feels intentional, like something reached into my memory and took what it wanted. Whatever it was, it didn't leave a mark on my body, only on my mind. Story 6. When I was a kid, the outdoors wasn't just a weekend hobby, it was a part of who we were. My dad served in the Air Force and was stationed at Ravens Hill Base near Ogden, Utah. So whenever he had time off, we'd pack up and head into the canyons that bordered the Wasatch Mountains. One of our favorite places was Bristlecone Hollow, especially in the fall when the aspens turned gold and the maples looked like they were on fire. The road up to the campsites was rough, nothing but packed dirt and gravel winding along cliffs where one wrong move meant a long tumble. I used to press my face against the window and look down into the valley, my stomach nodding every time the tires skated a little too close to the edge. There was one trip I'll never forget. It must have been 94 or 95. I was maybe 10. That year, my dad surprised us by saying we were going to sleep in a tent. It was rare. His back didn't handle the cold ground well, so we usually stuck to cabins or short-day hikes. But someone at his unit had loaned him an old canvas tent from the 70s, still smelling faintly of mildew and campfire. So we went, me, my parents, my little brother and sister, and our 2 dogs, Jake and Maddie. We rolled into the campsite in the late afternoon and pitched the tent beside a slow-moving creek. The dogs took off chasing each other through the underbrush while we gathered firewood and laughed over who forgot what at home. That night, after roasting hot dogs and watching sparks drift into the sky, we crawled into our sleeping bags and turned in. The tent was cramped but warm, the creek murmuring nearby like a lullaby. I drifted off to the sound of water and wind in the trees. But sometime deep in the night, I woke up. It was one of those alert wake-ups. Heart thudding, brain suddenly wide awake like someone had shaken me. One of the dogs was growling low, a t-f-e-t, deep, warning rumble in the dark. I could see his silhouette in the faint moonlight filtering through the tent's mesh top, ears perked, fur bristling, body stiff. At first, I thought maybe he'd heard a raccoon or a rabbit. We'd seen both earlier that evening. But then I heard it too. Crunch, crunch, footsteps, slow, measured, someone or something moving just outside the tent, stepping on dry leaves and sticks. My body went rigid. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The footsteps circled us. You could hear the pattern, deliberate, cautious. As we drove, my dad tried to explain it away. He said he'd seen a couple cars full of college kids heading up earlier in the evening. Maybe someone got too drunk and wandered off. But even he didn't sound convinced. We got home safely, but none of us slept that night. We didn't even talk about it much in the days that followed. It was like the memory sat there, too sharp to touch. To this day, I still wonder, was it just some kid playing a prank? Or someone lost? Or was it something worse? Someone watching, waiting for the right moment? I'll never know. But even now, all these years later, when I'm walking in the woods and hear that slow, steady crunch of footsteps behind me, my blood runs cold. Every time. Have you ever felt the forest watching back? These 6 stories aren't just about wilderness, they're about the thin, eerie line between the natural and the unknown. From vanishing time to footsteps in the night, strange shadows overhead to ominous silences in the trees, each tale reminds us that the wild still holds secrets, and sometimes it keeps them on purpose. Whether you've hiked deep into the backcountry, or just stood alone in the quiet of the woods, you know that feeling. When something doesn't sit right, when the hair on your arms rises for no reason, when the forest feels too still. So ask yourself, have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Felt eyes on you in an empty trail? Lost time where time shouldn't slip? If any part of these stories stirred something in you, a memory, a fear, a curiosity, don't let it fade. Share these stories with fellow explorers, campers, and night watchers. Tell your own story, your strange, quiet moment in the woods. Stay curious, but stay safe, because the forest remembers, and sometimes it watches back.